Hello, Widowhood. Our guest today is Miss Michelle Collins. She is a speaker, author, grief and wellness coach, yoga therapist, and mindfulness teacher. Let's get into the discussion.
Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner. Share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Tina.
Hello, Michelle.
Well, hello. Good to see you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you and welcome to the Widowhood. So where are you from originally?
Portland, Oregon.
Okay. So did you grow up there? Did you relocate at any point in time or?
Yeah, I spent most of my life here, or I was born here. My parents were born here, kind of a third generation on one side of the family. So some deep Portland roots. And I even went to college here. And then I moved away, then I came back, then I moved away, then I came back. I've lived in California, I've lived in Arizona, I've lived in New Jersey. And I always end up coming back. I do have a dream of living at least part-time in Hawaii sometime soon,
Ooh.
but I have not been able to make that dream a reality yet.
So before we go to Hawaii, Portland seems like just the eat fest to me. There are just so many wonderful places to have food
Oh,
in Portland. What are some of your favorite restaurants or cuisines there?
it's so true, Tina. For the size of the city, the food scene that we have here is just phenomenal. Yeah. I really love ethnic food, Chinese food. I love sushi. I, you know, gosh, picking a favorite. Honestly, I don't think I could because I just love food. Like I'm kind of a mood food eater, right? So I'm in the mood for tater tots today. I'm going to go to a McMinimans, which is our local pub scene. It's really, local. They try to do fresh and organic. And back when I used to drink alcohol, which I don't anymore, I loved their screwdrivers because they would fresh press the orange juice right in front of you. So little things like that. And there's
Nice.
just, I can't even narrow it down. There's so much good food here.
It is. So if you have never been to Portland, go and check out every restaurant you can. I've been there once for a work trip, and there was not a bad meal to be had. I was extremely grateful for the opportunity. So have you been to
Yeah.
Hawaii
And we
I'm
have,
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just one more thing about our food scene is we have extensive vegan and gluten-free and things like that that are often hard to find.
Nice. Now, have you
Yeah.
been to Hawaii before?
Yes, many, many, many times. My first trip to Hawaii, I was 7 years old. It was a favorite destination of my parents, and they would go every year without the kids. And then one year they took us. I was seven, and I still remember walking off the plane, and this was my first feeling of tropical air as well. And that was back in the day where they would meet every plane with a line of kind of hula dancer dressed up women, and they would put a lei on you, fresh flowers that smelled so delightful. And I still remember that feeling the very first time. I felt like I was home.
Hmm.
So I've always kind of considered Hawaii my soul home. It's I have some connection to the land or the environment there that I just, yeah, it recharges me. If I go too long without being in Hawaii, I feel depleted.
Oh, so how often do you travel to Hawaii? What's the frequency for you?
As often as I can afford to. Some years, if I have a more abundant year, I might go 2 or 3 times. It's pretty easy to get there from Portland, Oregon. We have direct flights.
Mm.
many airlines, many times a day. So it's a pretty easy flight, 5 or 6 hours, depending on what airline you take. And, some years, like I don't have any Hawaii trips planned in the near future because I'm not quite as abundant right now.
Okay, that makes sense. I didn't think of the ease of travel coming from Virginia to get to there is a bit of a haul. And when I lived in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, but I've been to Hawaii 3 times now, and
Mm-hmm.
I too would love the universe to put me in a place where I had to work there for about 30 to 60 days and just to really take in the area. It is also one of my favorite destinations to go. And it
Mm-hmm.
is, I was there just a few months ago with a family, with my niece, expecting her second child, her and her husband. He's stationed there in the military. And I didn't need much. I could get up and just go for a walk for about 4 miles in the morning and just take everything in and just
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it. It is definitely a place to go and visit and see. So I see the two books back there. Tell me a little bit about those.
Well, it's January 23rd will be their 1 year birthday. I wrote these two books. My second husband died by suicide in 2016. And in 2017, I got, I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, but I'm going to say a message from the universe. I've always been a writer, so writing a book wasn't too far out there for me to write a book about surviving spouse or partner suicide loss. And that was in 2017. I completely rejected the message from the universe because I did not want to talk about it. I did not want to write about it. It was still overwhelming pain and shame and all of the feelings we talk about as widows. And then in 2018, I met a book coach named Amanda Johnson, and she helped me create books from my story in just a really sacred, cohesive way. It was a beautiful experience. And it took me until 2023 to actually get them published through Save by Story Publishing, which is Amanda's publishing company. And um, I finished the first book, which is Surviving Spouse or Partner Suicide Loss, a mindful guide for your journey through grief. And I wanted the word mindful in there because mindfulness practice is one of the things that helped me with my grief and trauma the most. And then the day I turned in the manuscript, the rough draft, we'll call it, to the publisher, I went to bed that night feeling so accomplished. Finally, after, at that point, it was 4.5 years since I started writing, finally got that draft off. And I just felt such a sense of accomplishment. And then that night, I get in bed and I get another message from the universe. Seriously, I couldn't even get one day off that I have to write a companion book. And it makes sense because, and you may have had this experience as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too, in that people are so uneducated and inexperienced in supporting someone who's lost a partner or spouse to any, sudden death. Suicide is always a sudden death, but any type of sudden death and really any type of death, people just don't know what to do to be supportive. And in the grief groups that I work with, I moderate grief groups at grief.com and work with clients in grief coaching. And what I've noticed through the years is that so many of the difficulties people have in grieving are because of relationships that are challenged by the grief, especially if you're a spouse and you lost your spouse or partner. Who are your in-laws? Who is your in-law family? I mean, you lose so much of your identity, and it can really, really be hard when you have multiple people in grief. Nobody's at their best. Nobody knows how to support each other. And certainly there are functional units of grief, but what I hear in my groups is, people lose friends because their friends don't understand how to support them. And it makes the grieving process so much harder. So that's where the second book, Supporting a Survivor of Spouse or Partner Suicide Loss, a mindful guide for journeying through grief. And I wrote that book as a companion to the surviving book. If my ideal is that someone who's grieving the loss of a spouse or partner will be supported by a friend who finds these books, a loved one who finds these books, reads the supporter book, and then gives the survivor book to the grieving widow or widowed person. And they'll be able to go through it together. And so they're both getting this type of education that will help them both support each other.
That's a very good concept. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, let's go back a little bit, a few things. How did you and your late husband meet?
A mutual friend introduced us.
Okay, was it love at first sight, or did it take a while, or?
Oh no, it was instant. Yeah, it was both of our second marriage. We each had 3 kids. We'd each been married for I was married 19 years. He was married 17 years. Um, and we were both about a year out from our divorces. And this isn't exact, but it's, so we had so much in common in that respect. And yeah, it was our first date. He asked me for a second date, and then a week later he asked me to marry him. And
I'm
I
sorry.
know, I know, I know.
Hold on. And what?
Yeah.
Okay. So
He was very enthusiastic human being, very high energy. Like he knew what he wanted and wanted it right now. And I put him off for a while because I really didn't ever think I would get remarried, and certainly not after knowing someone a week. But he wore me down, and it was very obvious. When you're in your 40s, I think you really know what you want, what you don't want, and with the experience that we'd both had in our previous marriages, we just knew we wanted to be together every day forever. There was just no question, other than the hesitancy of the merging the kids, and he lived in Washington, I lived in Oregon, near where I live now, and we just were so in love. I mean, talk about the definition of crazy in love. That's what was happening. We
really,
just could not, yeah, we didn't want to be apart for like a minute. The kids made fun of us because he would go take the garbage out, right? And he'd come back and I'd jump into his arms, and he'd say, I missed you. And we'd kiss in front of them, which they hated. And they would make fun of us. You guys are like puppies. You have no sense of time. You haven't seen each other for 5 minutes.
have you ever felt that way before?
Oh goodness. Maybe as a teenager or young 20s. I nothing that real. I mean, I loved my first husband, but it was a much more calm situation.
I think there's something to be said about when you're older, um, that one, you have a sense of cherishing something in comparison to something else. So you have a huge ability to value this because of what you've experienced before. I can
Mm-hmm.
relate to that. And just what good looks like for you compared to other things that you had in the past. So the being able to assess that, I don't know, a week is pretty quick, but I applaud him for being enthusiastic and wearing you down. How long
Yeah,
did it take to wear you down?
we got married in 90 days after we met.
Okay. And what was your family thinking, or friends? Anybody? Are they just like, oh yeah, no comments or at
Oh
all?
no, they thought we were absolutely insane. I had so many estrangements that unfortunately are still, even though he died 7 years ago, I still have people that have not been able to forgive me or accept that I did that, who are just not part of my life anymore. And it's really heartbreaking.
I'm sorry, they didn't accept that you got married in 90 days?
Hmm.
Huh. Wow. Um, that is interesting. Did they vocalize it or just silently slipped away?
Some of each, some of
Okay.
each. I was really ostracized by my community of friends, and yeah, it was tough. It was really, really tough. And we thought, oh, we can get through anything because our love is so strong.
Mm. I am sorry you had to endure that. And
Thank
you got
you. Me
you
too.
said, mm. And you were married for how long again?
2 years.
2 years. And what part of your husband's suicide are you willing to share about that moment or that timeline?
Um, well, I share it all. I write about it.
Okay.
That's how I'm trying to help the world. So there's nothing I wouldn't talk about at this point. Do you
Okay.
want me to just tell the story, or do you want
If
to
you
ask a
would.
specific
No, no,
question?
I would
Sure.
rather you
Yeah.
have the liberty. Sometimes when people are asking questions, it doesn't give you the fluency to be able to, so at whatever point you would want to share that. Because when we talk about suicide, as you know, it's a disenfranchised grief. It's the type of grief that
Hmm.
people feel isolated. And you mentioned those words, shame and pain and alone. So when
Hmm.
someone is hearing this conversation, I want them to hear from you and your words and how you would want to share your journey.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much. I appreciate the freedom. Um, so things got bad not too long after we got married. With the merging of the children did not go smoothly, and the my ex-husband brought a lawsuit against me and my new husband. Um, and it just got really messy and angry, and I didn't have my family's support because they thought I was crazy. And I mean, there's some validity to that. I understand their point of view now. At the time, all I felt was rejection and you know, being kicked off the team kind of feeling. Uh, and as time went on, we resolved the lawsuit, but so many of the pressures that came with the merging were overtaking our ability to just love each other, because we thought our love is so strong. Like I said, we can get through anything. And at the same time, and when you're with someone for 90 days before you get married, you really don't know them very well. And I was seeing parts of Glenn that I had not seen when, during the courtship. Uh, he was struggling with mental illness. And once when I was married to him, I didn't consider separating or finding an out. We just worked together, got, on healthy practices and trying to get him therapy and all these things. And so he died in April. In January, he was starting to really have irrational times, um, where I was fearful of his behaviors. And there finally, my final straw, or the line that he crossed that made the fear outweigh my ability to be able to want to help him, was he got physical. He physically assaulted me. And it only happened once. And I asked him to move out the next day. And I wasn't even, this part of the story, I was not even able to tell for years because of the shame that I feel when I talk about that. And his family and some of his friends that came into his life during our separation actually blamed me because I made him move out. He was despondent, and so he killed himself. Well, if anyone knows anything about suicide, you know that it is not caused by other people. If someone wants to take their life, it's not because of something someone else has done. So, anyone listening to this podcast, I want to reassure you, it is not your fault that somebody else died by suicide. So, after he moved out, he was not honest with me about his activities. I thought that he was getting help. I thought that he was, we were pretty heavy partiers, to be honest. And he told me that he wasn't doing any of that. I found out after he died that he had been. And he, it was about 5 weeks later, and we had seen each other and talked, a lot. And he had showed up at my house. He rented an apartment at the bottom of my hill, and he showed up sometimes unannounced, and I would be scared because he had threatened to hurt me. And he would just beg to come back and tell me he loved me, and I'd tell him I loved him too, but he can't move back in until he's, healed some wounds. And then I one day got a call from one of the friends that he was seeing after we separated. I didn't know this person very well because while Glenn and I were married, he didn't see this person very much. And so it was very strange that I was getting this phone call from this person, and they were out of town and had been concerned because they couldn't get a hold of him. So I went down to Glenn's apartment to see if he was okay. This friend had called the police, and they were already there, and they were telling me I better just stay by my car because they knew we were estranged and they were concerned that there would be violence. So I stayed by my car, and they went to enter the apartment. And then I found his body in a car in the parking lot. Deep breaths.
I'm about to say, please pause for a moment.
Yeah.
As you're pausing, we may share that journey over and over. Sometimes it is easy. Sometimes it will hit you so hard from out of nowhere. There's a price to be paid to share. It's one thing to write it out. There's one thing to talk about it. So for the people that are listening, I want you to really take in the investment and the time and the emotional weight for Michelle to be able to share this, because she is so invested in your healing in this journey, and for you to know that you are not alone.
Thank you so much for saying that. That's exactly why I do this. And it is hard. But I have developed healing, self-healing tools, and I want to share them. And that's why I do this. So thank you.
You're welcome. So you find Glenn. What happens for you at that moment? Are you telling the police officers? Are you falling apart? Where do you go from there?
Yeah, I actually had a very physical reaction. It started with fear because I saw him, but my ability to comprehend what I had seen was not rational. So I did not know what I had seen. Like, I think my mind played a little trick, like, you didn't really see that. And I had all of these ideas of what it could have been flying through my head. Like, that wasn't him. He was just asleep. All of these types of thoughts were going through my head as I ran away. I did not go open the door and do further investigating. I ran away and found the police. I could not return to the car. They went and they confirmed what I had seen. And I, for a long time, really felt a lot of shame about the fact that I ran away, even though I had no control at the moment. I had no rational thought. It's kind of like when you touch a hot stove and your hand pulls back. You don't, that's the part of my brain that took me running down the parking lot. And then another friend showed up that the person who contacted me had contacted. And then the police, I actually yelled at the policeman because when he came over to confirm what I had seen. I didn't believe it. So I started yelling at him, which I don't know why that makes me laugh every time I think about it. And then I had this moment of clarity. So our friend, this was actually a friend of mine before I married Glenn. And so our mutual friend showed up. And I'm like on my hands and knees, sobbing, screaming. I don't even know what I was doing. I know there was a lot of no coming out of my mouth. And I stopped and I introduced the police officer to my mutual friend. All of a sudden, I remembered I was human. And then I went right back into this hysteria. And my friend drove me back to my house, and then I started making phone calls. Actually, on the way back to the house, I called Glenn's closest relative who lives on the East Coast because I was cognizant it was probably 7 or 8 o'clock at night when this was happening, that she might be going to bed. I mean, it's just the weirdest combination of thinking that's the first person I need to call because it's 3 hours later there. You know, you just wonder how this all happens in your brain. And then, you know, I got home and some other people were, our mutual friend had made a phone call, and then the phone, you know, everybody's blowing up everyone else's phone and people start showing up at the house. And I'm just sitting there at a complete loss, going in and out of shock. And when there's people at my house, well, I'm a hostess, right? So I'm like thinking I need to be pouring these people drinks and getting out snacks. And it was just this, talk about crazy. And then these people, the crisis team comes and they're handing me pamphlets about suicide and handing me their contact information. And I'm looking at these strangers like their mouth is moving and I can't hear a word that they're saying. I have no idea what they're talking about. I don't know anyone who died by suicide. I mean, it was just I was so disconnected from what was happening. And I do talk a little more detail about it in some of my writing, how the trauma affected me and how I dissociated from my body for part of that time. Like I was watching the police and myself from above. And yeah, that was that first day. It was just minute by minute, me thinking, no, this didn't happen. And then me realizing it happened. It was I kind of picture it as when someone's drowning, you know, you come up above the water for a second and you get a breath and then you're drowning again.
I can relate to that. And I think whether it is expected or unexpected, that disassociation and that struggling to cope and that ebb and flow of being in reality and being out in this place is a common theme.
Mm-hmm.
So I say that to say your loved one, if you're listening, may have not died by suicide, but that grief fog, grief brain, the mental
Mm-hmm.
capacity, the brain still reacts the same way in a hopes of trying to help us to try to slow down and to try to manage this life-altering situation and the things that need to come after that. What
Mm-hmm.
did life look like for you that first year, Michelle?
Um, really foggy, like you mentioned. It was his estate really took 2 years to close because of it was really complicated. I mean, he was a retired veteran. He was working for the federal government as a protective security advisor for the Department of Homeland Security. And it was just a lot of paperwork and a lot of phone calls and faxing, and it was beyond my capacity. I mean, a lot of those days I couldn't even get my socks on. You know, I couldn't even figure out how to get dressed, and I'm supposed to be doing this. You know, I did have some help, thank God. Some people stepped up and helped. I have a financial advisor friend who made a spreadsheet and figured out, like, it was just it was my, in a notebook, did you make this phone call? And he would check in on me every week. And that is really the only driver I had to get through that mess. And um, to be honest, the first 6, 8 months, I was basically on a spiral to kill myself with drugs and alcohol. I just was, it got really bad. I could not stand the pain. And keep in mind at this point, I am a yoga therapist. I'm a meditator. I'm a wellness coach. I'm a Reiki master. And all I'm doing is drinking and doing drugs to try to soothe my pain. So it's not like I didn't have any other methods, but nothing worked. So,
But thank you
oh,
for
did you have?
mentioning that because oftentimes people feel like you're a professional. You know these different things. You have these different skills. There is no amount of preparation for the level of pain, the disconnection from this person, and how all that will impact you. I support therapists, different people that are mental health professionals, doing coaching with them, doing one-on-one peer support, and they say that I'm a therapist, I'm this, but we are all in this human experience, and that pain and that trauma of that instant disconnection from someone that we love has a weight, and that comes and it takes a while. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
also very shocking for people to realize how long it takes, because you have the funeral and well, you're fine now, you buried them,
Oh,
you're going
goodness.
on with life, right? You go back to work, you have 3 days off, and life is demanding you to return. The sun is coming up every day. When you mentioned the spreadsheet, my background is finance and accounting. So my husband and I intentionally looked at what life would be outside the presence of one of us when we died. We did that in our early 20s and just left it. It was taken care of. My brother was the first person with me at home when Mark died. And I remember coming upstairs with all these documents, and my brother is a project manager, and that's what I do too. And he was like, "What is that?" I was like, "This is the death plan." And he instantly made a spreadsheet of
Oh,
all the places I needed to call and all the things that I needed to do. And I remember getting up every day. I used to keep a little notepad and I check off what I did today, because I went from this very high functioning project manager with the federal government to waking up and just staring at the wall and going, did I bathe yesterday? Do
yeah.
I bathe today? I don't know. And watching my brother look at me and going, like, she is not the same person. And I remember my family watching, not in a way of making it odd, but with sympathy and heartfelt concern of watching who they saw just a moment ago to what it looked like now. And which led to these types of conversations. So, similar to your handbook, there may be someone listening to this discussion who has a friend who loved one has taken their own life, and to understand this goes on for a while. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. This is what grief looks like. This is how it
Yeah.
shows up. And my daughter
Yeah.
and I were talking about, I can't remember the time period, but it was very prominent for people to wear black for a year. And when I thought about it, I was like, that would let everyone know to be very gentle with me, because I'm in this place where my mind is still trying to reconcile what has happened. And then after a year, you could wear different colors. And I was like, that actually seems bad, but then there's a great part of it that it's like it lets the whole world know I'm not quite what I used to be. It took me 3 months to go back to work. So I can see the benefit of different things to let people know, because when you show up at the grocery store or wherever you're at, we look just like we look. So no one knows that this is me going into
Right.
the grocery store for the first time without Glenn, and I'm going to cry in the spaghetti aisle because this is where we go. But those everyday nuances can be debilitating and just very exhausting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Really. And especially with a spouse that you shared, your bed with and your shower with and, every inch of your personal space with it. It's, I mean, anything can be a trigger, anything
Absolutely.
can send you into one of those grief waves where you're incapacitated.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your background so someone can know this hits you hard. And
Hmm.
obviously, it's something, and I want to say this, it's not something that just time heals all wounds. It takes, I believe, doing some type of work during this grief journey to help you get to a place of a life that you can enjoy again. And you talked about mindfulness early on and how important that was. Do you recall what part in your journey that mindfulness started to play a stronger role in your journey of grief?
I do. I do. And before I start talking about that, I just want to say David Kessler, who is my grief educator, teacher, and also the person who runs grief.com, which has an endless amount of support for grievers. Um, he says, in order to live fully, you have to grieve fully. And I really believe that. I really believe that. Um, and for me, because I'm a knowledge junkie, getting more and more education is where I get my help. But as far as mindfulness, I love to tell this story about my first moment of relief after Glenn died. So it was Saturday afternoon, evening when I discovered that he was gone. And the next couple of days were just a blur of absolute shock, trauma, people coming in my house, um, way too much food. One of my besties gave me a gift certificate to Instacart, which at that time, so this was back in 2017, right? So we hadn't had COVID yet, or 2016, I'm sorry. And online ordering of groceries just wasn't really a common thing back then. Uh, and that was my best gift because without leaving my house, I could get my groceries. And because, like you mentioned, the first time you go to the grocery store, it's actually a really big deal to see people outside of your immediate grieving circle who don't know that you just went through this. They don't know why you're crying in the spaghetti aisle. And it's weird. It freaks people out when you cry in the grocery store, which I've done a number of times. Um, so it was about Tuesday or Wednesday after Glenn's death. I think I might have left the house once to go to the funeral home, but I'm not sure if I had by then, or maybe I was getting ready to go that day. Because when it's a suicide or a sudden death, the medical examiner has to sign off, and so that delays everything by some days. So I was in my bathroom washing my hands in the sink. And that was the very first time that I felt embodied and present after Glenn died. So I'm just washing my hands, and all of a sudden, this is a mindfulness exercise, right? I am smelling the soap. I'm feeling the temperature of the water and the softness of the water. We have nice soft water here in Oregon. Um, and watching the bubbles reflect the rainbows. And I remember this incredibly clearly because it was like all of a sudden, all the chaos and shock and noise and pain just for a few seconds was gone. It was almost like if you're in, a loud room where people are screaming and then you get a noise canceling headset put on. That's how it felt. It was just, I was present. And that was my first moment of mindfulness. And then fast forward, like I explained, I had gotten very into bad habits to try to soothe my pain. I developed PTSD, and my therapist sent me to a trauma therapist to start working on just staying embodied, really, because the PTSD presented itself as dissociation. And I would lose time and not know where I was and get very disoriented. And it's traumatic. PTSD is traumatic. So my trauma therapist used the somatic therapy that Peter Levine developed. And that is basically mindfulness. And that is what, you know, helped me stop having complete dissociations when I had the PTSD episodes when they were activated. I like to use the word activated more than triggered because since my husband died by using a gun, just the word triggered used to be a trigger for me. um, so, yeah, but you learn when you have PTSD that you can't control your environment, that you have to learn how to respond to triggering events. You cannot make them not happen, no matter what you do, they happen.
Thank
So
you. I
that
want to,
was,
oh, I'm sorry.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the therapy, the trauma therapy was really the deep dive into mindfulness saving me.
Thank you. I want to circle back just a little bit when you were speaking about the drinking and the drugs. And I have found, and from talking to other therapists, and I'm curious what you have found, that a lot of times when people are showing up unwell or unwhole, a lot of the things that they're dealing with is unresolved grief that is slipping into different bad coping skills. And I want to expand grief in this conversation beyond the death of a loved one. It may be
Yeah.
lost expectations. It may be health reasons, financial, all those different things we grieve. And I believe it's often sometimes the death of a loved one that becomes this rippling impact that no longer are you able to hold up all the other things you were before. And you just slip out and you're thinking, I've been okay with everything else. Why is this an issue? And it's
Yeah.
one or two of these little things that's something we may have dipped into casually that start taking a hold on us because we're not really looking at the root cause. What have you found
Mm-hmm.
in your efforts of working with people?
Very similar. And, you know, I use the analogy, I use in my books, I use the analogy of hiking up Grief Mountain, that you don't have a choice but to make that journey if you want to reclaim your life. And another analogy I use with people is so taking what you just said into mind, the smaller things that happen. So say you're, you know, running, right? Let's just take something we all know, we're all aware of. You're running down the street and you have a certain number of miles you need to go. And the little things that happen, you know, and it may be big, it seem big, the loss of a job, the loss of a relationship, you know, not getting the promotion you wanted, whatever it might be. I think of those as little obstacles in the road or a little blister on your foot, things you can get around. Maybe your shoe comes untied, but it's nothing that really makes you stop. And that's what you were saying, like you can continue, but and you're like, I can still make it, you know, I can still make my goal even with this blister forming under my heel. And then with a sudden death of a spouse or something big like that, my analogy is that I just got cut off at the knees. You've heard that saying before. It's an old saying to get cut off at the knees, but I really sort of understand it so much more because there is no continuing your journey as you were. You have to stop there, pull over to the side, get your, you know, regrow your legs or get your prosthetics or whatever you need to do, new shoes, you know, and start off on your new journey. You can't just keep going as is. It's impossible.
I like that analogy because you literally had me there. I was running the Army 10 miler, much
Oh
younger
yeah.
Tina, and I had a blister on my second toe because I didn't have enough run time in my gym shoes. And I lost that toenail. And to this day, it doesn't do right. But I kept running.
Oh,
I was going
yes.
to finish that Army 10 miler. But
Mhm.
yeah, that is a very good, I like that. Very
I mean,
good.
it's kind of gory, but
I
so
mean,
far
guess it's boring. I mean,
haven't
we're
had
past
anybody.
that.
I haven't had anyone react badly to that analogy. Now, in my book, in the books, because a lot of people that are reading them are in trauma, I'm very gentle about any type of analogy that is traumatic, and I don't talk about details of my own trauma, just a little bit, because I don't want the book to re-traumatize people. It's kind of not the point.
Thank you. I will ask another question. At what point in your grief journey did you really start dealing with the shame, and how did you deal with that?
I think with the trauma therapy is where it started, because that was really the first place where I was safe, right? That trauma therapist was so good. She was like, I couldn't have found a better match. And I talk about how important it is to find a therapist that you connect with. I talk about that in my books. I talk about it's so important. And I think that it's a lifeline to find a therapist at all, because your therapist is not going through the grieving process you're going through. And when you're leaning on your friends and your family and your other loved ones, they're all going through a loss too. I mean, it may not be the same. If you're the widow, you're the only one, but they've all lost something. And so they're all grieving. And a therapist, they're there for you 100%. It's not their thing, it's your thing. So it was really the first place I felt safe. And for me, writing also helped a lot, writing my stories and realizing, like, it wasn't until the first time I wrote the story that I just talked about, finding Glenn's body and running, I wanted to erase that memory because I felt so bad. If you ever watch any of these traumatic deaths in a movie or on television, the person grabs them and hugs them and cries onto them, right? And I felt like I had done the wrong thing. Even though I had no control over myself at the time, I was steeped in shame for that. Among a lot of other things, of course, like the fact that I had to move out, um, there was a lot. And so trauma therapy was the beginning. And I have to say, and then the writing, and then I went through a grief educator course. I may have mentioned that already. Um, that was really, and reading David Kessler's book, The Sixth Stage of Grief, Finding Meaning, reading other books about grief, a book about grief, right? It's not how to grieve, it's learning from an academic standpoint. I mean, it does help with how to grieve, but learning anything from an academic standpoint to me makes it much more doable or understandable. And that, I think, is where, there's still tiny threads of shame and guilt and grief that will never be gone. But the fact that I'm to the point where I can actually talk to you right now about these things that I held such deep shame for. And also Brene Brown, her work and her TED Talk, all those things helping me realize that shame and guilt are just forms of self-harm. They do absolutely no good. So those are my tools that help me recover from those awful emotions.
Thank you. What was the catalyst to move into the training that you learned with David Kessler?
I joined his group. He has a group on grief.com called Tender Hearts, which is a wonderful grief group where they have, it's actually thousands of people, and there's their online meetings, and then there's small breakout groups for your particular type of loss, which is really helpful. Because if your spouse or your whoever died from murder and you're in a grief group and you're the only one who's lost someone to murder, it's the other types of death aren't relatable. Same with suicide, same with, so I was in that and reading, there's this whole educational piece to it that is, it's all online. And once I started reading that, I could feel a lightness. I could feel that something about this education was helping me find a little bit of light in my shame and a little bit less pain in the grief. And then I read his book. Um, Actually, I reversed the order on that. I read his book and then I found Tender Hearts. And then I saw that he was offering this grief educator program. And like I said, knowledge, I feel like knowledge is power. And the more I can learn, the less I suffer. So that's how I got into it. And I volunteer for the small breakout groups as often as I can, to help moderate. I moderate the grief groups on there.
Thank you. I would agree with that. The more reading that I did, the more connecting with other people and understanding, it lightened my load to understand how this is part of life. It may be the part of life that no one wants to be a part of, or people don't particularly talk about it until you're in that space. But there is a wealth of information available to help people to understand the process and not have to feel like they're alone and know that there are other people going through this journey with them, I think is also very encouraging and helpful.
Oh yeah, grieving in community.
Yes.
It's so helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. Couple questions. How have your children been in this process, yours or Glenn's?
It's been rough. I'm not gonna lie. It's been really rough. And being again, when you're a stepmom and your spouse dies, who are you? Right? Am I still their
Identity.
stepmom? Yeah. And I did at first, I really tried to make it clear that I wanted to be part of their life, and I'm still their stepmom. I want to help them with everything and stay connected because I really care about those kids. Kids, they're all in their, early and mid 20s now. um, but I was never able to grieve with them. They have a mom,
Mm,
and even though she and Glenn were divorced, obviously I was his wife when he died. They grieved together, and they had a whole lot more history with him than I did, so it made sense. But I was never part of that, and I've kept in touch with them the best I can over the years. But to be honest, I'm not really connected to them, and it's heartbreaking for me.
thank
I wish
you.
I could be there for them. And then as far as my kids go, it, it's it's been really hard. It's been really hard, and I don't feel like anything has been resolved. We just haven't been able to come back together.
Okay. Death, the death of a loved one alters your life in so many different ways. It is so much more than the funeral. It is the everyday activities, events, relationships, all these different things that we just really don't often think about how they're impacted. I mean, you got to go get spaghetti on a regular basis, whatever that looks like,
Yeah.
or that situation, or the people that you speak to in those relationships. And do I know you mentioned about relationships that were impacted when you and Glenn got together. Were there any relationships that were impacted from his death and that changed as far as friendship or family members for you?
Um, to be honest, yes and no. So yes, in that actually there's no. It's all yes. Because like we talked about already, you're a different person. And once I went through, that first year of just being really not present because I was just trying to numb myself. And then I've gone through an Ayurvedic training, the grief educator. I've written books. I did grief yoga certification because, why not? I mean, I'm already a yogi, so why not do grief yoga? Um, I
Hmm.
felt like it was a missing piece. So I also in 2018 stopped drinking and have been sober since then. And I am very committed to my sobriety. I think it's really helped me to also to get through, to stay embodied and to get through the shame and the guilt and lighten up the grief. To be fully present for my life is a very, very different situation. I was always a very heavy drinker. That was the answer to everything for me. So the relationships are impacted by that, as much as anything else, my lifestyle has completely changed. And so my relationships are with people now who are authors and coaches and speakers and healers. And I don't have those party friends anymore. Not consciously. It's not like I said, I don't drink now, so I'm not going to spend time with you. But you lose your commonality and your common activities. And so the friendship moves on. And I think that that's not unhealthy. You know, I definitely have some friends that I've had for 30, 40 years, 10, 20 years, that they're all impacted by these changes in my life, but maybe they had an opportunity to grow and become deeper because I grew and became deeper.
Thank you. In your coaching sessions or in the support group, if someone were to attend, what would that look like? What would they expect to how that for that to go?
Great question. Thank you. Well, on grief.com, in those in Tender Hearts, those are very specifically moderated in a very, formulaic way. And that is everyone is just there to share and be witnessed, because one of the things you need as a griever is to be witnessed. So there's no coaching, there's no advice given, there's no crosstalk. It's just a place to air, literally air your grievances. And in an environment where you are in community. And then the online part, I think it's Facebook, and there's all the town square is what it's called, and there's all the crosstalk and the advice and all that. So if you want to be part of that, you can. But in the groups themselves that I'm moderating on Mondays, it is just pure witnessing, and it's beautiful. So everyone just feels like there's this safe container to just be, look, I'm grieving, instead of, oh, you're crying in the grocery store. What's wrong with you? And so then in my individual coaching, I do a holistic approach to helping people who are going through difficult times. So not everyone that I work with has lost a person, is grieving a death, but like you mentioned earlier, there's grief, especially with COVID. I mean, we all grieved the life we had before COVID. I think we were globally in grief during the pandemic's peak. And so what I do is I assess with a client when I'm doing an individual, working individually, I assess where is your biggest pain point, because it might not be the loss of your loved one. It might be that your sister-in-law is being a bitch. It could be, it might not be that, because like we talked earlier, there's so much collateral damage that comes out of these events. So we talk about that. And then basically I offer mindfulness tools, because I believe those are the deepest, broadest ways to survive difficult times. And that includes sleeping, good sleeping habits, good eating habits, and everything that you're exposed to during the day. If I have a client who's watching 2 hours of news a day, we work on maybe limiting that a little bit and increasing, maybe you're reading some spiritual literature or listening to a meditation or something like that. I also make private, individual meditations for people. So I record whatever it is that's their particular pain point. I record a meditation they can listen to that helps them soften it. And that's the beauty of the individual work, is that I can get to know someone, learn what they will relate to, what will help them, and formulate the coaching experience around that. And I think that that's what makes it so incredibly effective.
Thank you. Who can you work with? Does it have to be in person? Is it virtual? Is there a limitation of location? How does that go?
No, not at all. Well, actually right now, all of my clients are on Zoom. I'm also a yoga therapist, so that I prefer to do those in person, but since COVID, I think I've had maybe one in-person client, which is kind of fun because my coaching base has broadened so much. I have a client, I had someone I was working with in Australia, The time was hard from the West Coast United States to Australia, but so it can be really anyone who is struggling to move on after a difficult something, whatever it was. And it might just be COVID. I shouldn't say just. I do tend to attract widows and specifically suicide widows because that's what I know. And people feel safe with me and comfortable because I can talk to them from a place of understanding.
Thank you. I actually wanted to ask another question. Can you explain what mindfulness? I don't want to make an assumption that people hear that word and know what that actually means.
I'm so glad you asked that because you're right. I dove right into that without describing what it means. So I did describe a little bit when I talked about the moment of presence I had with washing my hands. It mindfulness is the sort of textbook definition is the ability to be present with whatever's happening without judgment or reaction. But personally, I think that's kind of an unattainable thing. We're wired to react and judge. That's and partly that's a good thing because that's what's kept us alive all these, if you were just walking around being mindful and there's a car driving at you need to react, right? And jump out of the road. So in everyday regular life, what mindfulness does is it enhances your joy because you can learn to focus on the things you're grateful for. Gratitude is a mindfulness practice. It's taking your mind to what you're grateful for, away from what is making you anxious or sad or your grief, for example. In grieving, mindfulness can take you to remembering the love and feeling the love more than the pain. And some people say that the amount of pain you feel is equal to the love that you had. I don't think it's that simple. I think that they come and go, they rise and fall. And that when you feel that pain coming, oh, I can't believe it's, this anniversary or this holiday, and he's not here with me, then you can control your attention by using mindfulness. And instead of diving into that pool of pain, which is fine to do, there's nothing wrong with that. We have to feel. But you can choose instead to remember that wonderful anniversary where he gave me the flowers and the champagne was the perfect temperature and the sunset was the most glorious thing you'd ever seen. You can go to those memories and feel joy instead of just that deep pain.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll do something a little different. I've been driving all these questions. Any questions you have of me or any thoughts?
I would love just to know if you use mindfulness in your practice and how that looks.
I do, and I wouldn't say practice because I'm a nonprofit really doing peer-to-peer. For me, oftentimes, I think people find a lot of joy in walking, in being able to get outside of the space they're in, because when you're grieving, it's very easy to be shut in, as you spoke about before. That it's hard to be around the people that don't understand this journey that you're on. So just being able to go outside, leave your phone behind if possible, or at least put it on airplane mode, and just pay attention to things you may have not noticed as you're driving through the same area. You don't have to go to a walking path. You can just literally walk in your neighborhood. And usually about a mile is what I try to get people to do, because that's just enough to not seem very intimidating if you're not very having a life with a lot of motion. And just to exhale, to get some fresh air, to get outside of your home, look at something that you never saw before and take that in. And if you're able to journal that and just be able to resonate with that moment, I find that very helpful for people.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a very deep believer in connecting with nature and getting that fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
That's So, and then another question. Um, you mentioned your husband, so you're remarried?
Hmm.
Yeah. And so I would love to hear anything you'd want to share about that journey. So my husband died, it'll be 8 years in a few months, and I have not repartnered. I've gone on dates, but I've not been able to find a partner, and I'm certainly open to it. I just haven't found someone that I feel connected with. So I haven't had a boyfriend. I haven't had four dates is the record in all this time, and it's not how I want things to be. And so I would just love to hear anything you could share about your journey, and if being repartnered, this is something that comes up with my groups and clients. If being repartnered feels disrespectful to your late husband.
Ooh, good question. So I'll back up a little bit. No, those are fine. And those are things that I talk about on a regular basis. So it may hit me a little different, just like different things do. So Mark and I were together for 32 years. We met
Mm.
in the military. I met him when I was 18 years old, and I was 51 or 50 when he passed. So the person who my formative years and just becoming an adult were all done with Mark. And I don't say we had a perfect marriage because nobody does, because we're human and we're in it, but we were happy. We were happy. We were on a weekend vacation together. We were both trying to relocate to Virginia. He had taken a job there. I was trying to get one. I was on the other side of recovering from breast cancer. I was on the other side of what we thought was going to be uterine cancer and have an emergency hysterectomy. So we thought our children were getting older. We were getting ready to be empty nesters. We were looking to relocate to Virginia to a home that we had that was smaller and just sort of downsize. And Mark had always said that he was going to leave this world early. He had family members that had departed in their 30s and 40s. So it was a real concern. I was like, we can shift life to make things simpler, to eliminate this stress for him. We can do that. And we were on a weekend getaway, and I'm so glad that we were together because I do believe we all have an appointed time that we're going to leave this world. So I was grateful. It was traumatic, and because it happened right there, his heart attack happened in the room we were together. So me that first year was just like he is really gone. When you talked about being on your hands and knees there, obviously to me, it probably outside, that I was at the end of a hallway in this hotel that we had met halfway between both of where we were staying, um, losing my mind. I was, and as you were saying the word no, I was screaming on the phone to, I think one of my sisters saying, but I love him. Like I could not reconcile how I love him. And this is how our story ends, this journey of us living alive together. And I did not know what that would look like. But because Mark thought that he was going to leave this world early, we spoke about what life in totality would look like. We both said we would want the other person to get married. We would want you to date. We would want you to live the life that you have. And I think that's important to the question you asked about the cheating part or feeling like you were disrespected. I don't remember the exact term, but something to that
I said disrespect. Yeah, I didn't say
disrespecting
cheating.
disrespecting them. So to know we
Mhm.
had those conversations, um, I'm super proactive. I'm very intentional. So we talked about so when we made the plan as far as what life would look like when one of us was not here, it wasn't just a monetary conversation. It was what type of funeral do you want? What are all these different things that eventually I would need to know now, not when I'm trying to scramble to figure it out. So we had some what I think people think now are very difficult conversations, but I think they're essential conversations if we are cohabitating. And I should know because we make these vows till death do us part. So I need to know what that looks like so I'm not scrambling when it's go time. So
Mhm.
now Mark has passed, and it had been, I want to say about a year out, and I was visiting with someone, and they had been single for a while. And I put a glass down, and they immediately wiped it and started doing stuff. And I was thinking, how long for me being single would I start doing that with people? Because I don't know how to share my space. How long before I would start being a person that was a hermit that would not leave the house because I had closed my own self off? And it took some time for me to pray and just see where I felt like God was leading me. Was another relationship realistic? Did I have love to give? And at this time, I'm seeing a therapist twice a week, one for myself in a group therapy session. I'm reading books. I am not just hyper focusing on recoupling. I was just curious after that. I'm working on my own healing for me as a person was my first priority. And the second was my children, because I could not be of any use to them if I was not working on my own well being. So, about 18 months out, I was like, okay, what would dating look like for somebody that has been with someone for 32 years and I am 50 years old? I was upset for just the idea that I had to make that statement. I was like, I signed up I registered for the lifelong package where we grow older together and I found the guy that I like. And also, what was the dating pool looking like out there? Because I already had a great guy. And I was like, do I roll the dice and think that this would happen again for my well being? Because the likelihood I felt like the odds are not in my favor. And the other thing, Mark and I had a very passionate marriage. I had nothing going on to make me feel like I was passionate again or that there was nothing brewing inside of me. And I've talked to other people that had widow fire and all this other stuff. I was like, we don't even have smoke. I mean, I'm like, I don't even know what that's going to be.
I've never heard the term widow fire. That's funny.
And but you know what it means though.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I didn't know. So I was like, let me try online dating first. Maybe because I didn't even know if I would care to want to hear what someone else said. So I created a dating profile. I am one of five siblings. There's four girls and a boy, man, brother. And I let my two of my sisters look at the dating profile because I didn't know what I was doing. Once again, one of five, I was the only sibling that was ever married. So they're looking at the
Oh.
dating profile, they're looking at different things like that, and they're giving me, this is approved or not. I'm having conversations with people. I did use a Google Voice phone number because so much of our credit and who we are is connected to our phone number. I was very apprehensive about giving out my real phone number to anyone. So I obtained a DBA phone number. And the conversations went from bizarre to realistic. I would say there are probably two people that I connected with and thought there was going to be something worthwhile that proved in time. One thing I've learned in dating, for me, it takes time to get to know someone. You can think you know things, but usually about a year out, do you really start having a sense of what a person is and who they are? It was important. I had to also determine what were some of my non-negotiables. I thought long distance was going to be one that I could work with, but I soon realized that you need to be in a 50-mile radius. So needed to determine what are some of your non-negotiables, and I needed to identify. We needed to have the same faith. That was important to me because that is the barometer of how you live life based on what some of those core issues are. So, and also I found that some men were very intimidated by women who were retired Army officers. I did not really know
Mm.
that. So to eliminate that, I put a picture up, one me lifting weights, and then a second with me in my uniform with my daughter. So if that wasn't something that was appealing to you, swipe left. So we don't even have to have this conversation. So I learned a lot about myself. I did go into it realizing I was very content with the marriage I had. And if life did not provide me an opportunity to find someone that I was going to be happy with, then I would learn to be single. There are a lot of single people out here. So that took the pressure off of me as far as what that looks like. But in time, I met my current husband, Fred. We met online. He literally lived 15 minutes from where I was residing. And we met, we had been texting on the app for a while. And I said, can we just meet? Because I had met so many people like at a coffee shop or doing something, and they just were not who they said they were. I am 5'9". My late husband and I were the same height. I start liking wearing heels. I was not going to date somebody that wasn't 6 feet. I wasn't going to settle for some different things. And from the first moment Fred and I met, I was like, oh, we are alive. Hey, hello. We
Oh,
met at a coffee shop and we sat there and spoke for almost 2.5 hours. It's 4 or 5 years later to this day, neither one of us know what we talked about that day. We have been, this is his favorite coffee shop. We've been there several times. We cannot recall. And on the second date, he asked me, what are you looking for? And I said, I am looking to have a friend and I'm looking that I want to be married. Everybody may not want to be married. I know some people economically, there may be restraints based on getting remarried that may impact their finances, all those different things. For me, marriage was important. And there were some other things as far as focusing on getting to know me and investing in me and not investing in a physical relationship. Because I have learned that when physical parts get involved, you stop paying attention to what are some clues or what are some red flags or what are some things that we really want to pay attention to as far as who a person is. And we dated for about 3 years. We just recently got married February of 2022. And I am extremely grateful for his supportiveness. And I'll say that if you go to Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, either on my website or on YouTube, there is a conversation that I have with my husband and another gentleman who dated and married a widow, and a conversation with myself and another widow talking about dating. Because I think it's important to hear that other side of what that looks like. And
yeah.
because one of the things you're concerned of, what happens when my grief shows up in this relationship? What happens when this person finds out that I still have feelings for this deceased person? And he was not feeling threatened by the fact that I love Mark. He actually thought that that was a beautiful thing to have met someone that understood what that looked like and being in a committed, monogamous, directly towards you, nobody else involved relationship. Because I found that you do have to say monogamy was one of the things that was important to me. That may not be on everybody's list. So you have to have those conversations. And the first time that I want to say grief really showed up in Fred's presence. We were watching some television. I went to get us a drink and I came back and I just started trembling. And I realized that day was the 1 year mark of me living in Virginia. And I'm looking at this guy that I've dated for 7 months. This is not where I thought life was going to be. And I'm like, Mark is dead. There's this strange guy in the house and da da da. And I don't even live where I used to. And he notices all this going on. He comes, he's smart. He takes the glasses out of my hand. He puts them on the counter and he asks me what's going on. And I told him, and he said, you never have to feel bad about missing your late husband. This
Hmm.
is not, and I was like, I think we may have a winner here. In my head, I'm thinking, I didn't know how to put, I need someone to always understand I always love Mark, but I need them to show up that way. And he said that and then he said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to leave? Do you want me to stay? How can I support you and be there? And that's what I needed. I didn't need someone to shame me. I didn't need someone to tell me you should be over that by now. I needed someone
Hmm.
to just sit in that space with me and not make this about you. He stayed, I cried, I stayed, and I mean I cried and he was okay. And I think we watched TV and then he eventually left and went home. But after I was settled, in fact, he waited for me to kiss him because he wasn't sure how I would even respond because I had not kissed somebody else. I'd been married to my husband. So
Right.
he patiently waited for me to feel comfortable. Um, So because Mark and I had the conversation before about what we thought life looked like afterwards, I didn't feel like I disrespected him. But what I did feel in each part of that, and this may sound strange to someone that's not been in this, he is really, 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 really dead with each version of life that I have to continue living. And that part was like, I mean, obviously I know he's dead. I did all that, but it's like when you're taking the contents out of the house or you're doing those different things, the way it shows up in your life. And Mark and I eloped in shorts in Florida. And I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to have a wedding. And we did. My son walked me down the aisle. He gets along great with Fred. And I am extremely grateful that I have found someone else that is meeting me right where I'm at in life and loving me. And when we started Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, because it is a nonprofit board members, he was contacting his friends. She needs more followers on her YouTube. He is so supportive. There's not a part of him that feels intimidated or threatened by Mark because he's dead. There's no competition. And I'm not, now I will say if somebody is dating and looking for someone and they're constantly thinking, how do they compare to my late spouse? Then that's probably going to be difficult. But
Yeah.
what I needed to compare what Fred looked like to the version of who Tina was compared to who that 18-year-old girl was that met Mark. This 51-year-old Tina is my son literally told me, like, Mom, you're gonna be dating, like ooh, I don't know how that's gonna work for anyone, Mom. You're pretty intense. And I was like, I'm worth it. I'm fine. And he eventually, I mean, he gave a toast at the wedding. He
Oh,
it is good, but I think it's important for us to know why do we want to get in a relationship? If we're getting in a relationship to run away from the loneliness and our grief, then I don't think our healing journey or us dealing with the loss of our spouse is resolved. I think,
hmm
and not that it maybe resolved is not a good word. I don't think that you are I don't think you should I don't think you should seek a relationship for the fact of not taking care of what your grief journey looks like. If you're doing that just to plug a space, I don't feel like that's fair to this person. And if you're constantly trying to mold them into being something like what your late spouse is, I don't think that that would serve anyone well. I
mm, I
needed to
agree.
meet somebody who aligned with who I am now, and Fred does that, and I'm happy with that.
What a lovely story. Thank you so much for sharing that with me.
Thank you. Did I answer all your questions? That
You did. You amazing. Like came back around. You totally and completely. Thanks. And I want to meet Fred now.
Fred is out hunting, and so that is one of the very interesting things. He is an avid hunter, and my late husband was a hunter. And while we were dating, one day we were in the kitchen doing something, and he says, "So," and hunting season was starting to come up, and I could see he looked very anxious, and I was like, "Is there something you want to say?" And he said, "Well, hunting season's coming, and I like to go hunting for long periods of time." And my son and Fred and I are all in the kitchen doing something, and he looks at me like so serious. He said, "Are you going to have a problem if I'm gone hunting for like 3 or 5, 7 days at a time?" My son starts laughing, and he's just and Fred looks at him. He goes, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "My mom was made for that. That's what my dad did. She doesn't care like that." And he looked at he looked at me, and I said, "I just want to know what the hunting season is, so then I can plan time with my girlfriends or trips I want to take or things I want to do. I am not going to be here pining after you and waiting. I am a entire grown person. I have a life. I have friends." So he's actually, I think he's been gone a week. He'll be back um Monday or two. He'll be back Monday. So I've been hanging out and doing stuff. The cleaning lady came and I came home. The house was clean. I was like, everything's in its space. So,
Yeah.
but so you can virtually meet Fred if you go to my YouTube channel and look up the conversation about dating a widow. There's a conversation with him and another person talking about, and you may get some tips that may be helpful to hear
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
other side and what that looks like.
for sure. Do you know John Polo?
I do not.
Oh, my friend John. He's great, and he's a widowed person, and he spoke at the Soaring Spirits Camp Widow when I was there in July, also as a presenter. But he has a book out that's called How to Date a Widow.
Ooh, okay.
And it's just the greatest book. It's like, you know, almost written to a kindergartner, but in a good way. And there's like stick figures, and it's just a white book with black writing, and it's just you made me think of it because just very matter of fact, do this, don't do that. Pretty
Okay, well,
simple.
you have to send me his information. Maybe he'll be the next guest on the podcast to have a conversation to give people the
If you
tips.
can,
Yes.
yeah, if you can, he's a hard man to get hold of, but yeah, if you can get him, he's fantastic. He's great.
Okay. Any other questions for me?
No, I think I feel complete, and
Okay.
I appreciate your openness and your stories. It's wonderful to be. I don't do podcast. I'm a guest on podcasts, but I'm not a podcaster, so it's fun
Okay.
to have a chance to ask some questions.
I thought so. So I will allow you to wrap up this conversation. Maybe there's some points that you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover or anything that you want to end. But before we do that, I have two questions for you.
Okay.
One, what gives you joy?
Right now, I would say one of the biggest joys is I have a rescue dog who's somewhere around 4 or 5 years old. And when I rescued her, she had been through trauma,
Mm.
and she just was this skinny little shaky dog that I had to hold all the time and so scared. And when I see her now, 10 months after her rescue, running back and forth and playing with toys and playing with other dog friends, that my heart is just so light and joyful. I love seeing that. She's just a completely different dog. So I, yeah, I get a lot of joy from that. And, the usual things, being out in nature, being in a warm ocean, I get huge joy from that. But right now, the top of my joy is watching that little dog just run back and forth and bark at squirrels. And it's just wonderful.
Nice. Second question, in my final, if you were to pick any season or age in your life to talk to younger Michelle, what would you tell her and what age or range would it be?
Oh, that is a good question. Well, over my life, I've always learned to love the age I am now and not look back and go, oh, I wish it was then. So now would be the time. And I think that I would tell the Michelle in her mid 20s that to just not be in a hurry. You don't have to make a decision about what's going to happen for the rest of your life when you're 25. There's no rush. If you don't like, I was in graduate school at the time and I didn't like it. And I felt like if I quit the graduate school program, that I was just going to be a failure. And, some of my friends were starting to get married. I felt like I had to get married. It was just all this pressure that I was putting on myself. And it was very constrictive at a time when you should just be absolutely expansive. So,
All right, thank you. I'll let you wrap up. Like I said, if there's any items that you wanted to discuss we didn't cover, or just to wrap up the discussion, however you like.
yeah, thank you. I think the one thing that we didn't necessarily cover that is always, very, very important for me to share with widows especially, but all grieving people and people who have been through a hard time, and that is self-compassion. We are so hard on ourselves. Whether we're grieving or not, we're so hard on ourselves. But if you could possibly, to anyone who's listening to this, just give yourself a break, especially if you're grieving. If you need to stay in bed and cry all day today, then today I call those wet days. Then do it. If you need to eat that entire chocolate cake, then now's the time. Now is not the time to be counting calories when you just went through something really hard. Anywhere that you can get a little bit of a break, if you're a quick showerer, maybe an extra 5 minutes in the shower to just breathe and feel the warmth of the water. Any of these little breaks that you can give yourself, and especially if you're being hard on yourself, please just do what you wish your best friend was doing for yourself.
Thank you. Any closing remarks to everyone that's listening? Anything else, or we're done here?
No, I think if anyone wants more of me, there'll probably be some connection info in the show notes.
Yes.
I love to talk to people. I always offer a free consultation, short little conversation, and happy to help and support and spread resources however I can.
All right. Thank you for being here, Michelle.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for hanging out till the end of this conversation. I thought it was really important to be able to have this discussion with Michelle because so many people are grieving the loss of a loved one that has decided to take their own life. And having to live with that shame and that pain and isolation does not serve us well. I want you to know that there is a community that exists and welcomes you to be a part of that. We are here with you on your journey, here to help and encourage you as far as your healing and your mental wellness. We are on this journey with you. Thank you. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. Email me at widowhoodrealtalk@gmail.com or go to our website. Maybe you would like to connect one-on-one. Maybe you would like to be part of our private Facebook group or connect during some of the events, but please feel free to reach out. I am here with you. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune into Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.